So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, everybody, we are here for Kent with Bent 56. Oh my goodness. Kent Hovind and the Philosopher's Stone. So first I want to say a belated happy birthday to the Venerable Bede, who as of yesterday is 1,348 years old. Still very young, compared to my 150 million.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday. Also, Ben, we had a super chat that I asked you to preserve, and
Yes.
could you read that out? And I believe that was from Carrie Bronson for $10.
From Carrie Bronson for $10. Missed the last one, so here's a double-sized donation. The Void cares only for end results and accepts short-term variations in dedication. The Void is a very understanding deity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you muchly.
All right, so we are now going to be watching CSE 101.8. So you guys might have noticed that last time we actually ended a little bit early because we had a 107 finished and I had not downloaded 108. Still haven't downloaded it because for some reason the so-called methods that I use to download these videos is that's not working very well. So instead we're just going to watch it straight off of YouTube this time. So YouTube, please don't destroy me for this. I don't know. Anyway, let's go over the rules real quick because we have a drinking game that we do not actually encourage you to play. In fact, we discourage you from playing because Kent with Bent takes absolutely no responsibility for any injuries or damage to self, property, or others. So, but if you do decide to play along, our first rule is that we take a drink whenever Kent Hovind gets something right, but it can't just be him quoting someone else. He has to actually get it right on his own. So, let's see. The next one is that we drink whenever Kent Hovind says something that's just too stupid. Another one is we take a drink whenever he tells a joke that doesn't land, which with this, or actually with this audience, it might work. And our Kent with Bent pre-recorded the audience, they are way too nice to him.
Yeah, they love him. They think it's like a comedy show.
It's crazy to me. Let's see, we also take a drink whenever Kent Hovind tells a story that just didn't happen, which we think of as him like being unable to differentiate his shower thoughts from real life. Because you know how you have those like hypothetical conversations in the shower? Oh, there's Godzilla. We drink for Godzilla. We also drink for Mothra, who comes around too. Now, I don't know if I always announce this, but if you are a channel member, which starts at $1.99, you get access to all the cool channel emojis, and if you make a super chat with a kaiju emoji, we'll take a drink for that too. So, there's that. But welcome, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces here. We got Andrew Lorda, 2, the Venerable Bede, Monk Mayfair, Thronmulus, Hayden the Toa, TD Lane, and there's a $4.49 reduced super chat from Ian Chen, who says, from Ian Chen for $4.49 reduced. Jinx! I think the reduce was supposed to be dollar reduce. Thank you very much for your $4.49 reduce super chat, Ian. All right, I think that is all the drink triggers. Let's just get into this. This is the start of a brand new 1 hour, 16 minute, 39 second video.
Yes. Why does it say Dr. Kent Hovind?
He pretends he's a doctor on the internet.
All right, well, let's start another week of class here. We've left one more topic hanging about the
I like
age of
the
the
tie.
Earth. I recommend you get the book.
Oh yeah, that is a nice tie. Yeah.
Not to scale, but there's some planets.
It's so sad that Kent Hovind no longer wears his cool ties. Instead, he just wears boringly generic Hawaiian shirts. It's just like, dude, you used to have the ties. Your tie game used to be right there. But you know what I bet happened? I bet after his wife got back from prison, she started selling off his ties. And then when he got back home, he didn't have any.
Maybe. That would be pretty bad, dude. I'd be upset if that happened.
Yeah, well, he was probably upset also when she filed for divorce and evicted him from the house that was formerly his.
Yeah.
That also probably made him sad.
Yeah. That was all these things being upsetting.
That was the first ex-Mrs. Hovind. Now we're 2 more down the line.
I've lost count because I feel like it's 1 and 2 halves plus another half or something. Like I don't know which divorces have happened, or which ones he's just pretending that have happened?
Well, he's only, as far as I know, divorced number 1. Number 2, he is not divorced. Number 3, he didn't divorce. And number 4, he hasn't even broken up with yet.
Book and read.
She hasn't escaped his clutches yet?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
In the Beginning by Walt Brown. It is just real thoroughly documented. As I've traveled the last couple of weeks, I went through it again carefully and made all sorts of notes, and it's just awesome book. Now, I met with Walt Brown last week when I was in Phoenix. I called. I had a 4-hour layover at the airport, so he lives in Phoenix, Arizona. I called. We went and had lunch.
And yeah, no ads on this one. At 262 views, and like, I don't even think this channel is monetized. Yeah, no ads.
He came to the airport, and we talked for several hours. Had a good talk. He still disagrees about the canopy theory, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. He's not convinced there's solid evidence for a canopy, and I listened to his objections and said, well,
Yeah, Walt Brown is convinced that there isn't solid evidence for the canopy because it's absolutely so crazy. Even Walt Brown won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, my goodness, Kent, take a hint sometime. When like a whole bunch of Kent Hovind's arguments are on lists of arguments people think creationists shouldn't use. I'm like, my goodness, just get better.
I don't know Kent ever to have received any feedback. He just kind of puts stuff out there, and even when he does debates, he doesn't listen, right? It doesn't register with him. He's the teacher, not the learner.
Correct.
To him, in his mind, so,
All right.
good enough. So otherwise, other than that minor detail, I think we'd agree on most things. And really recommend the book, thoroughly documented. So external reading might be something you'd want right there. We have those, like $17, aren't they? Or $17.50. Right,
that's right. Shill the books.
Or you can get it from him for $17.95 if you prefer. Get $24.95 from him. Okay, so we can get him $17.50. Okay. One thing we did not yet talk about is the dust on the moon for the age of the Earth. Let me give you a little historical perspective about this. When I was in Texas, one of my students' dad worked for NASA in Houston, and he brought me this space capsule window. You can see the pock marks. I don't know if it's going to show up on video there or not, if I get the light on it just right. Yeah, I can get the light to pan past it. You'll see it's all scratched and pitted right in here.
Mm-hmm.
This is from little tiny dust particles in space. Let me set this dumb thing
tilt it
down.
a little more the other way, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll take a drink. That's right. It is a concern for space windows. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the cupola in the International Space Station is double paned, and the outer panes you can actually replace, whereas the inner planes are actually the pressure seal. So there's every once in a while they replace the outside windows because of this. So yeah, take a quick drink for Kent Hovind being right. Glass does get nice and scratched up in space.
If you're going 17 or 18 or 20,000 miles an hour and you run into a speck of dust, it's likely to scratch the glass. If you run into a big rock, it's going to be really hard on the space capsule.
Not true. Take a
drink.
drink.
But then it don't seem to be as concerned about that. The outer space is full of dust. Nobody questions that. This has been...
Yeah, you hit a big rock really fast.
Hit a big rock really hard and just kind of let yourself slow down.
I think we need a mod for KSP that adds dedicated litho braking parts. They're like crumple zones for your car.
You could probably make them, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
And known for a long time that space contains a lot of dust. Nobody cared, though, because they weren't going up there to travel through space. So, it didn't matter. But when they decided to attempt landing on the moon, they said, we better check and see how much dust is coming in.
They did. And what Kent Hovind is going to report is that a bunch of people, because I know this argument, a bunch of people did calculations and found that it would be too much dust. But then what actually happened in real life is a bunch more people did more calculations, realized it would probably be like 1 to 2 inches worth of dust. Thought, well, that's not a big deal. Then the Apollo 11 crew got up there, and yeah, it was about 1.5 inches of dust. Big surprise.
Yeah. This was my favorite argument, by the way, growing up, because I remember this one.
Nice.
It's like, it's supposed to be like 1.5 foot of dust, right?
Nope.
This is what Ken Hovind said. Well,
He
it
did
is what Ken Hovind said.
Yup.
I don't remember the exact number that he said, but it was a lot more than 1.5 inches or whatever it is.
Tesla asks, what craft is that from? I have no idea. I I'm not even all that convinced that it's actually a window from a space capsule. But the other thing is, even if it's not, the point is still true. Space capsule windows and things like that do get scratched up.
Studies were done on the amount of dust in space. Now, this is a little difficult to measure. So they did a variety of tests. One of them was on top of one of the Hawaiian volcanoes, top of a real tall mountain in Hawaii. They collected dust because they figured it would be less likely to be contaminated with the wind-blown dust off the nearby land, because there is no land nearby.
I guarantee you that no one is able to, from the top of a mountain in Hawaii, which, by the way, those mountains are not very high above sea level. So I don't know why you're using Hawaii, but let's just take this at face value. Yeah, lots of atmospheric dust is going to get blown in from being as far down as Hawaii, because here's the thing. You can't put a collection nest in, like, the troposphere or anything, right? It's going to be right down with us. So if you want to get space dust, you're going to have to go up into, like, the thermosphere or something, and no net is going, or sieve or whatever you're using, is going up to the thermosphere.
It's all, water. And they collected dust. They tried it with a couple of the high-altitude planes. I believe the U-2, but I'm not sure about that. They went up and dropped down a filter from a furnace filter and flew along in real high altitude for X number of miles for X, certain time, and calculated the area of the filter and how much dust they collected and said, okay, now how big is the world and how much dust is there in space? And through a variety of tests, they came up with varying numbers of how much dust is coming in from space, called cosmic dust.
I'm going to take a drink because Ken is right. They did come up with wildly varying numbers. It's almost like, within this varying set of numbers, some of the numbers that actually later turned out to be more accurate based on later testing meant that it was no problem for the astronauts to land on the moon and for there to be about 1.5 inches of dust. Weird.
It appears to be from several different sources. Comets and meteors that have burned up, and the fragments are coming in to the Earth. Littleton, a famous astronomer, said in 1955, now this date is important.
Okay, he just partially debunked himself. Part of the reason that some of the stuff that is in the atmosphere is dust is, like Ken Hovind said, that various... Oh. Take a drink from Mothra. I actually just got a text from my brother, and I will have to answer him later, because we are live right now.
Live?
Yeah.
Anything could happen.
Hey, that's the brother that was on the channel.
Nice.
Yeah. With the excellent mustache.
Amazing. 10 out of 10.
Would mustache again.
Would mustache again.
Yes. But so the thing, though, is that when it comes to the moon, little things like asteroids and comets don't burn up in the atmosphere because there's no atmosphere. There's an exosphere, which is going to do essentially nothing, because it's barely any denser than just the void between the Earth and the moon. So, yeah, one of the reasons why if you check dust collection from cosmic sources on Earth, it's going to be higher than that on the moon. It's just that reason alone. Things coming into Earth that would not end up as dust do on Earth and don't on the moon. Another thing is that the higher gravity of Earth means that a larger percentage of things that fly by are just going to end up being captured. And that's also the case because of the atmosphere, right? So if bits of dust get close enough to be captured by just the atmosphere, then they're going to slow down because they're going to have collisions with other particles. Whereas on the moon, if you have enough, velocity to escape the lunar sphere of influence and get back into Earth's sphere of influence, it doesn't matter how close you come to the surface. You can come 3 millimeters away, and if you whiz by with enough energy, well, you're not getting captured. I don't care how close that encounter was. So, yeah, because you can't do that on Earth.
In 55, he said that the X-rays and UV light striking the moon could, during the age of the moon, be sufficient to form a layer over it several miles deep. He predicted a dust layer several miles deep on the moon.
Okay, in 1955, a guy predicted a thing that about a decade later was no longer a concern and is not still considered to be really much of a thing.
But at least he made a prediction, Kent.
Well, that's true. And it was tested and then falsified.
What?
Isaac Asimov said in 1959, this is also important, they hadn't been to the moon yet. He said, I get a picture, therefore, of the first spaceship picking out a nice level place for landing purposes, coming in slowly downward tail first and sinking majestically out of sight. Science Digest, January 1959, page 36. So many people in the late
I'm sorry,
50s and
Isaac
early 60s.
Asimov was known for being a pretty great science fiction writer.
Mm-hmm.
Was he also known for being someone who predicted accurately scientific things, like how much dust there would be on the moon?
Not really. He was more of a science communicator outside of his fiction, so he was in sort of like the Bill Nye camp, where it's like, is he a scientist? No. But is he doing science communication? Yes. Does he usually know what he's talking about? Also yes. But does he make mistakes? Again, yes.
Well, that's fair.
We're predicting it would be impossible to land on the moon because of all the dust that might be there.
Okay, so I just want everyone to picture the lunar excursion module, right? So this is the actual, it's the LEM, and it's the device that was used by the Apollo missions to actually get onto the moon. And it has these landing struts, right? Little landing legs that come out, and there's a little circular pad on them to help distribute the weight. But here's the thing. If NASA was actually expecting several meters of dust on the moon, why did they not design a lander with basically snowshoes, right? Because the thing is, you could land on something like dust if you distribute the weight widely enough. But when you actually look at the lunar excursion module, which it's all over the internet, there are 3D models you can download, there are Lego kits you can buy, you can find nearly identical parts in Kerbal Space Program if you play that game, and I think have like the Making History expansion pack or something, I don't know. But yeah, look at it. NASA was not worried about sinking into several meters of dust. Why? Because they'd already figured it out. If you think that NASA was going to spend that much money on a spacecraft and then have it sink meters into the dust and be stuck or be unable for people to get out, I mean, that's crazy talk. At the very least, they would have given it snowshoes, but they didn't. Why not? Why not, Kent? If this was the current thinking during the Apollo missions.
If they thought I was going to sink into the dust, they wouldn't have tried to land on it. Like, with people, I mean, come on.
Yeah, just send a probe. And put it on snowshoes.
These brave men just sacrificed their lives. Oh, wait, no, it didn't sink. Okay, good, they get to come back.
Yeah.
Why budget the Delta V to return then?
Right?
59. They said there is just deep gray dust, 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 dust. Nothing on the moon but dust.
I mean, an inch and a half of dust is actually pretty deep for Earth. I would be horrified if I walked into a house and there were an inch and a half of dust.
So if it's like a millimeter of dust, what else is there on the moon besides dust?
Right, it's dust covering rocks, dust covering valleys, dust covering everything.
That's what it is.
Right.
That's the moon.
But I just do love the fact that we're now quoting a 1959. I reversed those numbers because that would actually make kind of sense if you quoted something from 1995. But instead, 1959, children's book.
Nobody knew for sure how thick it would be, but the estimates ranged around an inch every 10,000 years. Would be the amount of dust accumulating. Some said it was more, some said it was less. Okay.
Yeah, some said it was much, much, much less.
The fact is, there should be an awful lot of dust if the moon is billions of years old.
There is
an
kind
of a last-minute thing.
Yeah, there is.
An awful lot of dust is a meaningless amount of dust. Like, what does an awful lot mean?
To me, it means an amount of dust I would
have an inch and a half thick dust all over it. Like, that's a lot. If you swept that up, like, how much dust is it?
That's what a lot means to me, is how much would it be to actually clean a house that had that much dust? And if it had as much dust as the moon does, I would just set the house on fire and call it good.
It's a lot. Not nearly as much as if it were several miles, but it's still a lot.
Yeah.
Decided to extend the legs on this lunar landing module.
Okay, so he's showing for you, right? Okay, so that LEM, you can see it extending up past there, and it's a very big piece of machinery, because you can remember, they were on the moon for a few days. So this piece of machine was holding, oxygen tanks, CO2 scrubbers, batteries, fuel for the ascent in the upper stage of the LEM. And also it had a fuel tank for the descent stage, and, all of the What's the politically correct term that YouTube doesn't hate for the kind of burn that you do to land on the moon?
Oh,
There's a politically incorrect term. That is the term that is actually used. But
they start burning at the last possible moment, so that right when they like run out of fuel, they hit the perfect stopping speed and hit down at the same time. And they still fuel
Apollo 11 wasn't quite that efficient, so they didn't quite go through this full maneuver. But yeah, so in the bottom stage, there's fuel tanks for this fuel, and of course there's going to be LOX tanks for all the liquid oxygen you have for both stages, right? Because can't oxidize from atmospheric oxygen on the moon. And for $5, Vandelli 1998 says, it's a good thing scientists use kids' book for their evidence. Oh wait, they don't? No, turns out they don't. So yeah, you can see right here that this is not the kind of landing foot that's going to protect you from sinking in miles of dust or whatever it is, even meters of dust. So NASA was, just by the very design of the LEM, not expecting miles of dust. Why is that? Oh, because we had better estimates of actual dust accumulation on the moon.
Also, look at the boots that this astronaut's wearing in this picture. Do they look like they could keep him up from miles of dust?
No. They're just regular-sized boots.
You could sink right through it if it's the type of dust that you could sink through.
Especially given how heavy those suits were.
Well, there is less gravity on the moon because of...
Still, they're bulky and heavy.
Stuff.
Because of gravity?
That's true. Best way to lose weight, go to the moon.
It's called a duck foot. To spread the weight out like a snowshoe.
He says that, and it's partially true. Yeah, it is to help spread the weight out, but it's also partially to just make sure that even if you land on uneven terrain, and some part of each leg is likely to hit, because they could pivot a little bit. But the thing is, it's still not enough to actually support all of that. And he's like, oh, that's a snowshoe. Well, then why isn't their astronaut equipped with snowshoes? Because that right there, that snowshoe, quote unquote, is actually not that much smaller than what you would get for personal snowshoes. I've gone snowshoeing. It's a thing people still do, right? You can go and get snowshoes. And I remember when I was snowshoeing, I once was like, is the snow really that deep? So I took one of my snowshoes off, and yeah, it was like 3 feet deep. And I had trouble getting out of the snow to get my other snowshoe back on. Because I had one stupid leg sticking down, and the other one was up, then my knee was up by my chest, and I was like, well, this is a problem.
Well, you're basically leaning on your knee like my face.
Yeah, so the thing is, if this were a snowshoe, this guy would also have needed snowshoes. But I'll tell you what, guys. Go find the NASA snowshoes for me. When you find the NASA Apollo snowshoe plans, let me know.
Put these landing pads on there. They did not lengthen the ladder, though. They thought they would sink into the dust far enough that they wouldn't have to lengthen the ladder any. Notice the ladder is too short. The ladder is actually 18 inches too short.
Okay, so your reason for the ladder doesn't reach all the way to the ground is because you think that they thought they were going to sink in about a meter, but then they didn't give the astronauts snowshoes. Like, the reason couldn't just be to help it fit better inside the thing and to save weight by saving on the ladder? Because I don't know if you know this, but every single gram that you send into space, you have to account for with fuel.
Yeah.
Like, it's... Okay.
Yeah.
Then they got there and landed on it. They thought, this might be a problem.
It's 18 inches too short. Have you ever seen a ladder that started 18 or more inches above the ground? Because I sure have. Like, mounted on buildings and things.
That's 1.5 feet, right?
Yeah, it's barely anything.
Like, did they have to jump 1.5 feet to grab it? Is that what he's saying?
I don't think they did. I'm pretty sure that's just a little bit of a high step.
How do you determine a ladder is 18 inches too short? Especially if it's supposed to sink down into the dust, shouldn't the ladder be pointing up so they can climb out?
I'm not sure. The
only
thing I can think of is that he means that it was 18 inches clear of the ground. In which case, that's not too short. That's
how I design my ships in KSP.
Yeah, why would you need the ladder to get all the way to the ground?
I mean, I can get it there, but I designed it so that the ladder stops short of the ground, so it doesn't hit the ground.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I'm an idiot. Imagine NASA doing these plans.
Guy, when he jumps, if he jumps down 18 inches, could he get a rip in his suit? You don't want to get a rip in your spacesuit out there.
That's true.
That's
You're
true.
in a
I'll drink to that.
hostile
Yep,
environment.
I'll take a drink.
A pure vacuum, or close. So the ladder was indeed too short, and there's all kinds of models of this at different places. When they got there and walked on the moon, though, they discovered, of course, there's
Okay, so hold on. I'm gonna bring us back a second because there was that picture that I want to take a look at.
Places. When they got there,
Okay, so this is what is allegedly meant by too short, which looks like more than 18 inches off the ground. So I don't even know what measurement we're going with. That looks like it's like it's 24 inches, like basically like 0.6 meters or so, right? Maybe 0.5 something meters. But here's the thing: you can pull yourself up that ladder.
Especially when you weigh 1/6 of what you're used to weighing. Even
Right.
with all the equipment on, it's going to be a lot less than half.
Yeah, you're still gonna weigh something like a third or so. Like even if you double how much you're wearing in terms of weight, based on like your just regular everyday clothes, right? You're still like let's say you're a 180-pound person on Earth. I don't know what that is in newtons, so don't at me. Okay, and you wear 180 pounds worth of equipment on the moon. You're still going to weigh a third of your normal weight on the moon with all of that.
Which would be 60 pounds, which I think you have no problem
Lifting
if you
yourself
only
up
weigh
onto that
60
ladder.
pounds and you're used to weighing 180. Getting yourself up that ladder, it'll probably be a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the problem is here. And I don't think those packs were 180 pounds. I think they were closer to like 60 or 70, weren't they?
And if that ladder were 18 inches longer, it wouldn't really make it that much easier.
No.
I don't think.
You'd still probably have to do a little bit of a hop.
and walked on the moon, though, they discovered, of course, there's very little dust on the moon. Chicago Tribune, July 21st, which was 2 days after the landing, or no, that would be a week after the landing. July 20th, they landed on the moon. Yeah, the next day.
And there you can get a little sense of scale of the LEM right there. So I'm not sure which Apollo mission this is because I don't have all the pictures memorized and whatnot. Oh, the Venerable B, your dad worked on the... No. Tesla Ranger, you said 1/6, but that's how much the weight is reduced by. What I'm saying is, even if you were weighing, or even if you were carrying your full weight in equipment...
So 180 plus 1 in the equipment.
Right, you're still weighing only a third of what you would weigh on Earth with that amount, without any of the equipment. So what I'm saying is, just to weigh you down on the moon, it takes a whole lot more. Anyway, the Venerable B says, my grandpa worked on the lunar rover. That is really cool, man. That's awesome. But yeah, so if you picture these legs, right, and you saw the little quote-unquote snowshoes, what is that going to protect this gigantic thing from? I mean, this is not an insubstantial piece of equipment here.
Right.
Section 1, page 1.
I like the net painting, though, and that sounds...
About where's the dust in space? Where is it? It wasn't there, and everybody was surprised.
No, not
some of the
everyone was
Christians
surprised.
and some of the non-Christians had argued there's not going to be any dust on the moon. And some people today give creationists a hard time if they mention the dust argument because they'll say it's been proven wrong years ago. Well, no, It hasn't been proven wrong. What happened was they left some plates behind to collect dust on the moon and see how much dust actually hits the moon, how many fragments and particles hit the moon of various sizes. They found out by measuring certain particle sizes, this graph is from Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning. He has a very thorough answer to the lunar dust
we have a question about the ascent. So they made it back on the landing module. So what happens is if you take a look at the LEM, there's the upper command stage, and then there is the lower stage that actually has the landing gear and contains the tanks and engines for the descent stage. When they were ready to get back up, they waited until the command module in orbit was aligned with them, and then they separated the lower stage of the LEM from the upper stage, which had smaller engines, smaller fuel tanks and whatnot, because you're shedding a lot of the weight. And then those engines were used to do an orbital rendezvous with the command capsule that was still in orbit, and then those two sections docked, and the astronauts transferred back from the LEM into the command module. So the whole thing is actually pretty cool. Once you actually get the whole thing into space, right? The LEM was actually stacked so that the bottom of the LEM was in line with the top of the command module, and then while in orbit. Actually, I think was it before they established orbit? I think it was before they actually fully. I think in the original Apollo flight plan, it was actually before you fully circularize orbit. So you're still technically suborbital, but you have like time. And so they actually detach the LEM, flip it around, and then use the docking ports to reconnect. And then that's how they flew to the moon. Then once you establish orbit around the moon, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong transfer through the docking port into the LEM, detach from the docking port, and then they actually then begin their descent with a retro burn that is calculated to take them to around about the landing site. And then for Apollo 11, they were overshooting the target. Oh no, they were undershooting the target a little bit. So they slightly adjusted their burn in a somewhat risky maneuver. And eventually they landed close enough to the designated target zone that it was not going to be too rocky or anything for them to land. And then, yeah, like I said, the top part of the LEM then would detach at the end of the mission, come back to the command module in orbit. It was a very complicated whole thing, but by doing it this way, they ended up saving a whole lot of mass versus a direct ascent, which is basically you just send up a lander that is also a return capsule and send it straight to the moon. The whole thing goes down, the whole thing comes back up, and then back to Earth. That is a much more energy-intensive sort of a mission profile. So, but it also is less complicated and has less points of failure. So it's safer, but it's way more expensive. So NASA went with the more dangerous, but much, much cheaper Apollo style. And if you do, in fact, play Kerbal Space Program, which I do recommend, wasn't Jack Black's mother involved in the Apollo mission? I do not know. I have seen no reason why she couldn't have been, but I've never heard that to be the case. Yeah, so Tesla Ranger says, you are correct, the CSM docked with the LEM before they arrived at the moon. I do know that, but I'm not sure if they rearranged that assembly before or after establishing a parking orbit around Earth. Because, if you want to go to the moon, your typical thing is you launch, you get into orbit around Earth, and it's called a parking orbit. And then when your orbit is when you're at the right point in your parking orbit to make a transfer to the moon, then you can get to the moon. Ideally, you'll have already gone into the orbital inclination you want to make the transfer. But if you haven't, then you'll have to make a plane change in orbit and then get to the point. Anyway, Throw a Dwarf for $5 redo says, hashtag a not totally human thing to do. So glad I name dropped you to the batch now. Looking forward to the new start T-Rex D&D or anything. So yes, so this is in regards to my recent appearance on Globers and Goblins, which is the live stream D&D campaign that the batch is running with Fight the Flat Earth and Chrismer. Vishanti was in there, although now she can't be anymore. But anyway, it's a good bunch. I was there yesterday, as a guest. I will be there again, not this coming Monday, but the next one. And also, I am going to be in a live streamed D&D game with Hovind here, and TD Lane, and the Gutsick Gibbon, and her fiance, and Cheshire Vic, all run by Maddie from Science Side Up. It will be on Cheshire Vic's channel, and that will be every other Monday. We're going to try and make it so it's the Mondays during which Globers and Goblins is not airing. So that way, every Monday, you're going to have some kind of D&D thing to watch involving sort of the debunking YouTube community. So there you go. Anyway, let's keep going. We could spend the entire stream just talking about the Apollo missions, but I don't want
to. Near the end of the book, in his frequently asked questions section here, that goes through all sorts of interesting information if you want to get more on that. But he said they measured certain particle sizes. How many of this size hit the moon? How many of this size hit the moon? Well, if you look at the moon tonight, you'll see there have obviously been a few impacts of some much larger pieces. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are craters up there that are gigantic.
Oh, that's true. Take a drink.
So they interpolate or infer the data between the particle sizes that were measured. Plus, the other problem is when you lay a plate up there to collect the impact, particles coming in, it's not going to do the same as it would do if the particle just plain hits the moon. When the particle hits the moon, it blows up a cloud of dust, which comes back down. When they drilled down into the lunar soil and brought it back and tested it, they found only 1 out of 67 particles was actually from space. So by measuring the amount of dust hitting these plates, you've got to multiply that times 67 to get the true number for the depth of the lunar soil. Because most of the lunar soil is...
What? Did that make any sense to you?
No, it didn't.
Because what I'm hearing from that is that 1/67th of the dust is actually new dust that's accumulating. And then a bunch of the rest of the dust is stuff that's getting knocked from other places back onto the moon, which could in fact be from things like small collisions, or even from things like high-energy gamma rays hitting the moon and actually exciting a little tiny particle enough to actually launch it into a suborbital trajectory. But Ken Hovind here is saying that this means that we should inflate the numbers, even though it seems like it should mean that we deflate the numbers, and I have no idea what his logic is here. If someone else...
I don't know, I would hear the rest of his argument to judge it, because it's definitely not there yet. I don't get the logic of it yet, so...
Okay.
I kicked up dust that was already there. You figure a dust particle hitting at 18,000 miles an hour packs quite a wallop.
Okay.
The mass times the velocity, is
Momentum.
Is how it works. And even though there's not much mass, there's an awful lot of...
He can't even say momentum. Oh, I'm taking a drink just because Ken Hovind, as far as I can tell, doesn't know what momentum is.
Just multiply some things together, and that's how it works.
Yeah, you multiply some things.
That's what I would say, but I also don't teach classes.
Yeah, you're not purporting to be as expert in science.
I'm not pretending to be a doctor and an expert on dinosaurs.
My goodness.
The velocity. It's moving real fast. He goes through all the formulas in his book right here. It turned out the actual measured amount of dust turned out to be 2.7 inches per million years.
Almost like it's not a problem. Okay, look, I want to know where he goes with it, because maybe it'll be interesting.
Not near what they thought. They thought it'd be an inch every 10,000 years. 2.7 per million is a whole lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And the skeptics will argue the dust ratio is much less than they expected. I agree.
Oh?
However, you figure 2.7 inches per million years, and they tell everybody the moon is 4.6 billion years old, that still should have made 1,000 feet of dust on the moon.
But Kent, you already just said that only a tiny fraction of that was actually new dust being introduced from space. See, that's the part I don't get. What, he already pre-bunked himself. Oh, I think I lost Bent. Bent? Oh.
Was in space when it came back down.
Bent, I'm sorry, I lost you there for a second. I think we had internet hiccup. So, sorry about that, everybody. For about 3 seconds, you just were not coming through. So what was the last thing you said?
Oh, never mind.
Oh,
I was the stream was also locked up for me, and I was trying to fix that too.
Yeah, I think it might have actually just, I don't know. The internet was weird for a little bit. Sorry about that, everybody. I hope it didn't buffer too much. But I am seeing now that I'm getting about 4.5 megabytes per second up. So that's okay, sorry about that. OBS decided to disconnect. I don't know why I'm having internet troubles today, but Ben can tell you that I was trying to download frames for another...
And yesterday.
Yeah.
And yesterday.
Yeah, there's been some weird internet stuff going on around here. I think if it keeps up, it's going to have to be a call to the ISP. Be like, hey, there's money coming into you for a service that is not being delivered.
Right.
So... I hope that this is about the end of it, and that we can have a nice, smooth rest of the day. But stay with us. Sorry about that. Anyway, here we go. But what I was saying is, the people who say not to use the moon dust argument is basically every creationist that's still operating that isn't Kent Hovind. Yeah, burn some incense for my machine spirits. Bent, you have some incense, right?
Yep, I'm on it.
All right.
Seminars just for sake of time, because I only give 55 minutes, per church session, typically, or wherever I'm speaking. And so I sometimes will leave that out, but it's still a very legitimate argument.
Real quick. Type 1 in the chat for sensual therapy, and 2 in the chat for dragon blood.
Ooh. Those are both great names. Unfortunately, the audience won't really be able to experience the scent of the incense, but yeah, there you go, guys. 1 for sensual therapy, 2 for dragon blood.
1981, Walt Brown, these quotes are right from the back of his book here. He said, I had a conversation with Dr. Herbert Zook of the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space
I
Administration.
think Dragonblood is
NASA.
winning so far.
He had been
Sorry for
intimately
unmuting,
involved in
but I think
estimating the thickness of the
Dragonblood's
dust layer on the moon before the first Apollo moon landing.
Uh-oh.
He also helped analyze the lunar material brought back from the moon. Of the many interesting things he told me and sent me by mail, one is critical in answering the above question. NASA did not realize until the moon dust and rocks were analyzed that only one part in 67, or 1.5%, of the debris on the moon came from outer space. The rest was pulverized moon rock.
Right, so we shouldn't expect there to be that much dust. What? Why is... I don't understand why Kent is presenting this to us, because this contradicts his claim.
In hindsight, this makes perfect sense. Meteorites that strike the moon travel about 7 times faster than a bullet, averaging 20 kilometers per second. When they strike the moon, they are not slowed down by an atmosphere, as on Earth, because the moon has no atmosphere. Therefore, the projectile,
It's not true.
regardless of size,
Was he reading a quote? Okay.
vaporizes and kicks up a cloud of pulverized moon rock. The vaporized meteorite then condenses on the pulverized moon rocks. This was determined by slicing moon rocks and finding them coated by meteoric material rich in nickel. Uncoated moon rocks have practically no nickel. In this way, NASA arrived at the factor of 62.2. And he covers this in his book.
Right, and that's a reason why you shouldn't expect to see ridiculous amounts of dust. I don't... Okay, sure, whatever.
Book about the details here, the velocity that it's going and how much energy it would carry and how much rock it would pulverize. So the moon dust argument is still, I think, very legitimate. All right, let's talk about
As long as
the Garden
Kent
of Eden,
thinks
what
it's
this time was like.
Yes, that should be everyone's standard for evidence. Is Kent Hovind thinks it's legitimate, so clearly. Actually, I do think that my inability to download this video may have also been tied into the internet troubles. So I think if they persist for one more day, we're going to have to make some phone calls. Oh, Maya's here. Hi, Maya Atkinson. How are you? Maya is one of my longest standing mods. She's been here since basically the channel started.
beginning.
From the
Maybe
creation
even before me.
until the flood.
No, because you've been here for decades.
Oh, that's right.
2 Peter chapter 3, verse number 3. The Bible says, knowing this first, there shall come in the last days scoffers. And of course, it's obvious to anybody that's lived very long, there's a lot of scoffers in this world. People that scoff at God's word.
Okay, look, I'm just going to have to go out on a limb and say that if you say people won't believe you when you say things that are contrary to their already well-established beliefs, that's not a particularly amazing prediction. I'm not saying the Bible's wrong. I'm just saying that using that as evidence of the Bible, that the Bible basically says, hey, people who don't believe the Bible are going to think that the Bible's crazy. I mean, yeah. I mean, not really exactly an unusual set of circumstances there. I don't know. I'll admit that when it was written, the Bible as a single thing wasn't really conceived of, but even if you modify it to say the gospel or the scriptures in general, still, yeah, people who don't believe that think it's going to be a little bit crazy. It's just kind of everyday human nature to think the things that you don't believe in are a little silly.
That's why I don't
I
believe
deal
in
with
them.
them
Yeah.
all the time, and I enjoy it, actually. And it says they're going to walk after their own lust. I'm convinced, after doing this for 30-some years now, that the reason people scoff at the Bible is because of their lifestyle, not because they have any scientific reason to reject God's word.
I'm just going to drink because you only believe in evolution because you're horny is on my Kent Hovind debate bingo card. So you guys might not know this, but the Science Friends actually did develop bingo cards for Kent Hovind debates. And there are various things that he likes to say, and one of them is literally, you only believe in evolution because you're horny. Because it's, for some reason, one of Kent's things. And I'm sorry, I still think that keeps me PG-13, but...
When we were living over on Burgess Road about 10 years ago, a student called me from University of West Florida. He said, Mr. Hovind, I understand you believe in creation. I said, yes, sir. He said, I'm a senior in anthropology class, a major in anthropology at UWF, and I believe in evolution, and I'd like to come do an interview with you. I said, well, that'd be fine. Come on over.
Is this a thing that happened?
He came over, talked to me for 2 hours.
I'm ready
After 2
just in
hours, he
case.
said, you know, evolution's not true, is it?
Yeah, I'm taking a drink. This is a hashtag things that didn't happen.
I mean, it's possible. He's just talking about a student in college who's...
It takes very little anthropology knowledge to debunk a huge swath of what Kent Hovind says.
It sounds like someone who wants Kent to try to convince them that Kent's right.
All right, well, this is an optional one.
It's possible, but...
It's possible. I don't think it happened, so I took a drink.
It's not on a plane, that's the thing. It's not on a plane, so I'm not convinced that it didn't happen. Everything that Kent says that happened on a plane, he's probably taking a nap and having a dream.
I said, no, they're not. He said, man, I've been taught this all my life. He said, you just undid in 2 hours what I've learned in 20 years. He said, I got to go back and write a report. Can I borrow some books? I said, sure. I loaned him a few good books on creation. I said, just bring them back in a week or two, please. So he called me about a week or so later and said, hey, I'd like to bring your books back. I'm coming by. I said, come on over. He came over, set my books on my counter, kitchen counter there on Burgess Road. He said, well, I decided to stick with evolution. I said, would you like me to tell you why? He said, you think you know why? I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I know why. I said, Tim, you sat on my couch 2 weeks ago and you became convinced that creation was true. Evolution was not true. As you read these books, you probably became even more convinced. And then as you thought about it, you realized, you know, if the creation story is true, there's a creator. And if there's a creator, there might be some rules. You know, thou shalt not. And you don't like those rules. And so there's probably something in your lifestyle that would have to change if you accepted the idea of a creator. So you decided to stick with evolution because it's more convenient for your lifestyle. So basically, you're sticking with evolution because of your sin. Am I right, Tim?
Yeah, I don't think this conversation ever happened. But I already drank for things that didn't happen on this one, so...
Yeah.
He said, I don't want to talk about it. And left. Got him right between the eyes. That's exactly why people reject God's word. There's no scientific reason. It's because of their lust. Spelled out for us. Next verse says,
oh my
they're going to
goodness.
say, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all...
Sorry, go ahead.
It's like offensive to me. That's not... No, Kent. No.
So, is this offensive to you as someone who considers themselves a Christian and who also
That's
accepts
to me as
evolution?
someone who accepts Christianity as a Christian and who also doesn't think science is a tool of the devil, just like math, to try to convince us.
Well, math
That God
clearly is
is
a tool of the devil.
Sorry, if it is a tool of the devil, then I've been fooled by the devil. But I just don't think science and math are tools of the devil. Because that's crazy to me. Anyway, yeah, it's offensive to me that can't be honest. He has to be this dishonest to try to promote what he knows to be a lie.
Yeah.
Taking it this far is like it's subjective and it's my personal opinion, but it's crossing a line that I'm not happy he's crossing.
No, I don't blame you.
things continue as they were. We get into a lot more of that on video number 4 of our series on what the scoffers are going to say. The way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. Long, slow, gradual processes. That's called uniformitarianism. We won't get into that now. We will.
Okay, so that was stupid. I'm going to take a quick drink. Current geological techniques do not only assume current processes were existing in the past, nor do they assume that processes always happen at constant rates, nor do they exclude catastrophic processes. Modern geology is built on a model called actualism, which takes into account, real-world physics and chemistry, and assumes that physics and chemistry hasn't changed, but not that current geological processes are the only processes that have ever occurred, and that catastrophes don't exist. We know of just a quick example of numerous things like turbidite deposits, shock quartz, craters, both modern and paleo craters that you can find in underneath the surface. If you want to see an actual real asteroid impact crater in the United States, you can check out Barringer Crater in Arizona. It's about halfway between what is it? It's about halfway between Albuquerque and What's that town in where all the tourists go in northern Arizona? Bent.
I don't know.
That's where all the hippies go.
Grand Canyon.
No, not that far.
Oh, Flagstaff?
Yeah, Flagstaff. It's about halfway between Flagstaff and Albuquerque. You can go to Behringer
Like
Crater.
college. I think it's a college town too, but I don't.
Yeah.
Have I even? I've been through Flagstaff. I think. But
I've been through
actually
Flagstaff. I've never actually been to it. It's too touristy and like expensive.
There were plans for a Copper Magna show in Flagstaff, and then the beer thing happened last year, and then now opening up again, and so we'll see.
But yeah, so when a modern geologist looks at Behringer Crater, they don't go, "Oh my goodness, this must have formed slowly over the course of trillions of..." No. Like, yeah, that was an asteroid impact. It happened in like a few seconds. And it's eroded a bit since then, but yeah. So, yeah, it's... The whole... Basically, Kent is reaching back into the 19th century for his version of what modern geology is, and that's not modern geology.
Well, later. The next verse says, though, for this they willingly are ignorant. Willingly ignorant. I tell people in the Greek that means dumb on purpose. The scoffers are willingly ignorant.
Well, that was a joke that didn't land because Kent was the only one who laughed.
And I'll drink to it, but I don't hate that joke.
I don't either.
It's more of a pun than a joke.
It just still didn't land.
But I don't mind it if you ever watch
I also
me say
kind
that.
of feel like looking up the 2 Peter 3:5. Actually, I do have in reach of my person a Greek New Testament.
Well, of course you do.
When would I ever not? But goodness, do I actually want to find 2 Peter? I'm in Luke, John. Acts. Come on. Oh my goodness. Why is Acts such a long book? Romans. Corinthians. Oh, Corinthians A. Corinthians B. Second Peter. Ephesians,
It's right after first.
Yeah. I'm just having this. Okay.
Right before
First Thessalonians. My goodness. First
You're getting close.
Timothy. Yep. 2 Timothy. Philemon.
So close.
Come on.
I mean, I can't read Greek, so.
John. Okay, so here's 1 Peter, finally. My goodness. Oh, wait. How did I skip past 2 Peter? Okay, what was it, 3:5? Okay, there's the second verse. Oh, there you go. Okay, 3:5. Lontane autos voluntas. Let's see. You know what? I am not sure what that phrase means in Greek. Sorry, guys. I just looked up 2 Peter 3:5 in Greek for no reason, because then I realized, you know what? I don't actually know that much Greek. Yay.
I want to know about 2 things. That by the word of God, the heavens were of old. God just spoke and created the heavens by his word.
That's not what that said there, but okay. So here's one of the things that you have to recognize about the New Testament, right? So, oh, why did that happen? Whatever. For some reason, something funny happened. Whatever. You guys will just have to deal with the cropping and padding being weird. I don't want to fix it right now. So one of the things you have to realize about the Greek New Testament is that when it uses the word "word," it's not always the best translation to just translate it directly. The word in Greek, or at least in ancient Greek, is logos, or logos if you want to use the reconstructed pronunciation that most Greek people hate because it doesn't sound anything like modern Greek, but whatever. It implies a rational force to the universe, a the underlying principle that makes things function according to predictable rules. It's not simply the word in the sense of a spoken thing, right? So when the New Testament says by the word of God, it means more than just God said a thing and then a thing happened. It means that God is the source of the rational ordering principle on which the universe is based. And because of his power over the actual organizational principles of the universe as a whole, that for that reason, you then... Oh, and Tesla Ranger just put in 2 Peter 3:5 in Greek for us. Thank you very much. Although it doesn't start with a new sentence, so I'm not sure why in your quotation the first lambda is capitalized. Whatever. Anyway, so yeah, it's not really the case that Kent is taking the full context here into account, but big surprise, King James Onlyist doesn't actually understand enough about anything that's going on to be taken seriously as a biblical exegete. So with that, we are going to take a quick break. We're going to go to the intermission and have a chance to do things like refresh drinks, maybe read the Bible in the original Klingon. So here's the thing. There are people working on biblical translations, but I don't know to what extent that is done. So what I will do is I will try to find, during the break, any biblical text in Klingon and see what we can do. So
that sounds easy.
So if I can read like Genesis 1:1 in Klingon, I'll do it. But no promises, because I don't know. Yeah, Dapper makes Kent's arguments better than Kent himself. It's true. Yeah.
It's true.
Alright, so here comes the intermission. I'll make sure the intro doesn't play when we come back, because I remember this time. And we'll see you on the other side of the intermission.
I want to take a moment to talk about something serious. There is a problem facing late surviving non-avian dinosaurs in modern America. Hunting is very strictly regulated, and only allowed at certain times of the year. This means that for much of the year we have to rely on farm-raised food, which means money. If you want to help a starving dinosaur, please consider donating on Patreon, or buying from my merch store. Links are in the description. Please help. Dinosaurs all over YouTube are depending on you to help them through the hunting off-season.
Oh, Nani? Dare? Oh, Gojira desu ka?
All right, we are back. Unfortunately, while I was just looking for a Klingon translation of Genesis 1:1, all I could find was a what's called a Bing-on translation, which is when Bing tries to translate Klingon. Also, hey, Science Side Up is here. So what I want everyone here to do is check out Science Side Up's YouTube channel and subscribe, because not only does she have good content, she's also going to be my DM, and so if I don't shill for her channel, I won't get many hit points. And I want hit points, so go subscribe to Science Side Up, because she's making me. Please help. Okay, but what that does mean if any of my mods find a translation of Genesis 1:1 into Klingon, let me know. Put it in the chat. I'll check it out. But do be warned: the one on creationism.org is fake Klingon. Yeah.
He didn't lift a finger to make the world. He just spoke, and all the molecules obeyed. They even came into...
I would argue that God, according to most somewhat sophisticated versions of Christianity, doesn't have fingers to lift. But, you know...
to existence by his speaking. He speaks and the wind stops. He speaks and the dead come to life. The waves lay down. Everything in the universe obeys his voice, except us. He's having a little trouble with us now, but he's going to fix that someday too, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess. But the scoffers are ignorant of how God, by his word, made the heavens. Notice heaven is plural. How the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Kind of a strange verse. How can the earth be out of the water and in the water at the same time? Well, the scoffers are ignorant of how God made the heavens and the earth. That's the original creation, right here, about 6,000 years ago. They're also ignorant of the flood, which is what it says in the next verse, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. Now you will find some, Eric, as you go around teaching, that will say this is referring to Lucifer's flood. There are those who've made up this idea that there's a gap between verse 1 and verse 2 in Genesis 1, and that during that time Lucifer fell from heaven, and there's a Lucifer's flood, and that's what this is talking about.
Oh,
All
Lucifer's
of that business about
flood? I don't
Lucifer's
think I've
flood
ever
is...
heard of Lucifer's flood.
So...
A second flood?
I believe it would have been a first flood.
And then Noah's flood is the second flood?
Yes. And the idea is... So, this is an idea that has kind of basically disappeared from most of Christianity, which is the gap theory. The gap theory, which, you know, big air quotes on the word theory there, right, is the idea that there's a gap in time between Genesis 1 and 2. And after Genesis 1, where it says that God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, there's a full creation, and that's where we get all of the sort of pre-human stuff happening. That's where the dinosaurs lived, and it's where presumably, like, you know, some of the early mammals like Indricotheres and Brontotheres and whatnot lived. And then when Lucifer falls, before humanity is created, his fall results in the destruction of this pre-Adamite world, and then God starts somewhat over again, but on the basis of the world that already existed, with creating Adam and Eve in a Garden of Eden, which is a special place he sets up within the world that was already existing. Now, this idea has basically just been completely abandoned by almost all of Christianity. Pretty much the vast majority of Christians are theistic evolutionists of one stripe or another, and then those few Christians who are either old Earth creationists or young Earth creationists usually go with, in the old Earth sense, they tend to go with a day age, or they tend to think of the days as being somewhat metaphorical. And for young Earthers, they just go with, 6 actual 24-hour periods. So the gap theory has... I have trouble finding anyone who supports the gap theory. I just don't think that there's really a lot of people pushing for it. Although it's a better idea than young Earth creationism is.
Pure baloney. There's zero evidence for it at all. If there was a Lucifer's flood.
Okay, saying there's zero evidence for it at all, and that's a reason not to believe it, is pretty rich coming from Kent. So just because it peaks, pegs high on my irony meter, we're taking a drink.
Yeah.
Noah's flood would have wiped out all the evidence for it.
He just doesn't have a whole lot of self-awareness.
No, not really. Although I will actually tend to agree with him that I don't think that verse was referring to any pre-Noah flood. The gap theory is definitely a late development in Christian theology. I don't think it would have been on the minds of any Bible writers.
By the way, as I read Walt Brown's book, he made a statement in here that just absolutely fascinated me this last week as I was, wherever I was going. He said if you get a tank, like we ought to try this here for the kids when they come for our children's ministry, an aquarium. If anybody's got an old aquarium that we can use, we'd like to get one. Fill it full of sand, rock.
I have a terrarium.
We
Actually, I have
have
two terraria.
Scrabble,
least two.
all sorts
I don't think I have any more.
of stuff, and let air bubbles bubble up through the bottom. As the air bubbles come up, it lifts the particle and then drops it again.
Mm-hmm.
The sand particles will be lifted and dropped, right?
Yep.
When the waves come in on the beach, as the wave is real tall, it presses the sand down, and then when you go into a low spot in the wave called a trough, it's less pressure, so the sand lifts up. That's why if you go out in the beach just a few feet and put your head underwater, you see sand flying up all over the
This
place.
whole thing he's saying, I'm like thinking about it from the perspective of how to get my pool to be like completely clean.
Turning into a wave pool, dude.
It's making what he's saying more interesting, I'll tell you that.
Well, the sand flying up is from the pressure and then the release of pressure as the waves go over.
To some extent,
Imagine
yeah.
during Noah's flood.
Well, first, because he got some stuff right, we're going to take a drink. It's also one of the reasons why, if you ever just stand still on the beach, you'll find that you're starting to slowly sink into the sand if you're beyond the line of the water, right? Where the waves are actually crashing over, say, like your ankles.
Right.
It's because, basically, this is called liquefaction, right? Where the sand starts to act like a liquid because it's in constant motion. And it happens slowly on the ocean, but it happens more quickly in things like landslides or floods or things, right? And it's why you actually get deposits from such things being graded, which means that the heavy and bigger particles are at the bottom, and the smaller and lighter particles move progressively up towards the top. So essentially what the ocean is trying to slowly do is shove you into a graded bedding as a result of wave action. Fortunately for us, it does it slowly enough that you can usually just pick up your feet and say, "Haha, ocean, not today." So, there you go. Let's see how Kent turns the thing that is true into something that is stupid.
As the waves go over, or as the moon, the tide goes over, all of the sediments are going to be lifted and dropped millions of times.
A much less significant thing for the moon, but okay.
Now, when you lift it and drop it and lift it and drop it, the heavier particles work their way to the bottom, the lighter particles work their way to the top, and it's stratified.
He's right. Take a drink.
So they took, one guy did an experiment where he took a dead reptile, a dead bird, a couple of dead animals of various different kinds.
Kent, one guy is not a sufficient citation. Okay, here's the absolute minimum for a citation. Name of author, date of publication, and actual publication in which it was published. And the name of the article. I think I already said that, whatever. So, author name, article name, publication venue, and date of publication. That is the absolute bare minimum you need to give anyone to even demonstrate that the thing you're saying happened. Because some guy put a bunch of dead animals in a terrarium and bubbled air through it is not a sufficient citation. But let's see what happens.
Put them in the sand, rocks, gravel, mud, mixed it all together, and just had it be compressed and released, exactly like waves would do. And within a few hours, it sorted them. All the reptiles in one layer. All the fish in one layer.
Interesting.
Now, the evolution...
So that's exactly not what we see in the fossil record. And for $5, Kerry Bronson says, Kent likes to package his BS with facts. He explains it himself with his poisoning the dog metaphor for evolution being Lucifer's subterfuge. Yeah, he actually, I think it's usually rats, but he has this thing where he's like, you know, rat poison is 90 or 95% good food. It's only like 5% poison, which is true, by the way. Most animal poisons are mostly just regular animal feed that have been slightly poisoned. And that's how they get you. So here's a reason why I'm going to go ahead and say that Kent Hovind's explanation for the fossil record here, which is basically hydrologic sorting, doesn't happen. So I am going to go ahead and check on the internet for, let's see, Hell Creek Formation fauna. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the list of paleobiota from Hell Creek. Now, granted, I'm using the Wikipedia list, so, you know, don't be too angry at me, right? But okay, so if Kent is right, this layer should only have one kind of organism, whether it be fish or reptiles or birds, right? So do we have any fish? Well, we do. We have genera such as Accipenser, Amia, Belanostomus, Coriops, Kindlea, and it keeps on going, right? Okay, so that's bony fish. We even have cartilaginous fish, like sharks and things. So we have a number of, let's see, we've got some dogfish in here with Kilocilium, Galagadon, which is a carpet shark. Let's see, Lonchidion, which is a member of an extinct family of sharks. Keeps on going. We also have dinosaurs. Ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, ornithomimids, tyrannosaurs, hypsilophodontids, dromaeosaurs, pachycephalosaurs, and even a few troodontids. But we also have ornithischians that aren't listed there, like Denversaurus and Ankylosaurus, which are ankylosaurs, and, well, more ankylosaurs. Let's see. Bunch of ceratopsians. Okay, but then we're also getting into Eumanoraptorans, which is going to include certain very, very light organisms, like a Caroraptor, which is almost a bird. And then let's see, we're getting it. Oh, we got pterosaurs, so we got Asdarchids. Let's see, we got crocodilomorphs, like Borealisuchus, Brachycampsa, Thoracosaurus. We've got turtles, like Adochus, Basilemus, Trionyx. We've got squamates, so this is things like lizards. Let's see, we got Cemeterius, Obamadon. Hey, we got one of the taxa named after Obama, of which there are a whole bunch. Chamops, Heliosanoa, which is a relative of the Gila monster, if you know what those are. Let's see, we got Charistoderans, which are a kind of lepidosauramorph kind of thing in Champsosaurus. We've got mammals, like Simolodon, Simulamus, Esonodon. We got Mesodoma, Digimus. Let's see, we got actual metatherians. So these are actual, in our clade of Mammalia, like Alphodon and Didelphodon. And I'm skipping over most of the organisms here. We've got actual eutherians, which are placental mammals like Purgatorius. And Gypsinictops, there you go. So, yeah. So, in Hell Creek, we have birds, we have reptiles, we have cartilaginous fish, we have bony fish, we have crocodilians, we have pterosaurs. So, let's see. Also, for $2, Patriot University PhD says Kent lists his references in his dissertations. Yeah. Goodness, his dissertations. So, we already know, just based on one formation, and by the way, that formation is not unusual in terms of the kinds of organisms that it's preserving in terms of taxonomic breadth, that, hydrologic sorting can't explain this, because according to Kent, all the fish should go to the bottom, and then all the reptiles should go to the next layer. But that was one formation with all of these things mixed together. Let's see what else Kent has to say on it.
Say that the geologic column is evidence for their theory of evolution.
Okay.
The geologic column is evidence of a flood.
Then how come it doesn't actually match your predictions, Ken? So if you look at the geographic column, right, the Hell Creek Formation is actually pretty close to the top. So we have about 450 years worth of, 450 million years of geological history before that, before the Cretaceous. Well, actually, it's not 450, it's about 400 million, a little bit less. 380 something, right? So out of 450 of the Phanerozoic, that's pretty close to the top. Yeah, and Creodebunk says, what about bone density? Yeah, that would also affect things, which is a reason that you shouldn't find birds and turtles in the same layers. But you do. So we're near the top of the geological column. We're still finding fish. So if the reason that we find fish at the bottom is because they sink fastest, why are we finding them at the top? I would love for a creationist to actually go with that. Hypsilophodontidae is polyphyletic, right, from the venerable bead. I am actually not positive. I know that I haven't been seeing the term Hypsilophidontids in the literature much, which makes me think that that might be the reason. But I'll be honest, the nitty-gritty of ornithischian phylogenetics is kind of confusing even for the experts, and it moves too fast for me to always keep track of, so I am not sure if Hypsilophodontids are polyphyletic. They might be. A lot of quote-unquote traditional dinosaur taxa have been found to be polyphyletic. So, there was once a time where all theropods were either megalosaurids or coelurosaurs, and that is no longer the case. Also, the genus name Silurosaurus is still open. If anyone wants to describe a Silurosaur by that name and then pretend that that's the thing the whole taxon is named after, just saying.
I don't want to.
It's exactly what a flood would do, just by pressing and releasing the pressure on the sand particles at the bottom.
No, it's not, Kent.
After big floods like Mississippi or something like that, they'll find the sediments are stratified down for 50 or 60 feet.
They're not stratified. They're in a single stratum of graded bedding. So this is another thing that Kent likes to do. He likes to confuse grading with stratification. And also, in other places, he likes to confuse lamination with stratification. So a stratum is a layer of the geological record that all shares the same, essentially, depositional cause. Oh, drink for Godzilla. That essentially has the same depositional cause and environment, right? So a single flood will lay down a stratum. The stratum itself will be graded so that the biggest, heaviest bits are at the bottom, the lightest, smallest bits are at the top, and they transition smoothly from the bottom to the top, right? That's what a flood does. Now, if you have, say, a tranquil lake that has seasonal variations in sedimentation rates, which most of them do, because you have different things like snowfall up on the mountains in the winter, then it melts and it causes additional sedimentation to come into the lake. Then during the summer, the snow has already melted, so the streams have less volume. They bring in less sediment, the sedimentation rate goes down. These are called varves. Each varve is a lamina, which is a layer within a stratum. It is a result of cyclical variations within a stratum. But because they all have the same depositional environment throughout that whole stratum, that being in this case some lacustrine deposition, that whole thing is a stratum, and the layers within it are laminae. So Kent Hovind cannot tell the difference between laminae, graded bedding, and strata. He thinks that anything that you can kind of see a layer in, that's a stratum. But that is not how geology works. It's not how it works now, and it's definitely not how it worked in the past.
Below the bed of the river. It actually has an effect that deep down into the sediments. We'll get into more of that later. Okay. The Bible says the scoffers are ignorant of the creation and the flood, and this is referring to Noah's flood, not Lucifer's flood. There was no such thing as Lucifer's flood. Next verse says...
Kent, I agree with you. There was no such thing as Lucifer's flood. I'm going to take a drink. Oh, man. Yeah. So...
By the way, let me say this. If there was a flood to kill spirit beings, how's that going to work,
Sure, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how spirit beings work.
Was it a spiritual flood? In which case, what evidence is it going to leave in the physical world? Secondly, we know...
I'm just going to say that many incorporeal monsters in D&D, while they have resistance to non-magical physical weapons, aren't completely immune to them. You can bash a ghost in D&D in the face with a mace and destroy it, at least temporarily. So, there you go.
Know from other stuff we'll study later that Lucifer did not even fall from heaven till way after the creation. We know from Ezekiel 28 he was in Eden until iniquity was found in him. And the Garden of Eden wasn't made till day 6. We'll get into more of that later. But 2 Peter 3 says, the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. God is keeping things preserved till judgment day. So the scoffers are ignorant of 3 things. And you need to know this for the quiz. The scoffers are willingly ignorant of the creation. They don't want to admit God created the world because that means God owns it and there might be some rules. They're also ignorant of the flood because they don't want to admit there was a flood because that means... So
CryoDebunk says, can you say in examples where exactly the layer is that has mixed fossil size and bone density? So that's most fossil-bearing layers. So ultimately, the real question is, where are the graded bedding fossil beds? And there are some. There are some in the Lance Formation. I don't know about any in the Morrison Formation, but I mean, there are plenty of those. But ultimately, if you find anything that is not a turbidite deposit that is fossil-bearing, which is most fossil-bearing sediments, then the bones in those are going to have different sizes and densities. Anytime you find an articulated skeleton, you know for a fact that you do not have a turbidite deposit that deposited post-mortem bones. Now, if you have intact skeletons that are themselves graded, then that means that the turbidite deposit was formed before those bodies could rot, which might actually mean that the turbidite deposit is itself a direct result of the cause of death of the animals. Carrie Bronson for 5 says, if it turns or if it ends its turn inside a solid object, it takes 1d10 force damage. Would that apply to water too? Yes, I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. Thank you for bringing it back to D&D, Carrie Bronson. That's awesome. So yeah, basically, Creo Debunk. It's sort of one of the things where it's like I don't even know where to begin naming them. But basically, I'll tell you what. If you go to any part of the Morrison Formation, or not, yeah, the Morrison Formation, say that's exposed in like Montana or Colorado, or almost any part of the Hell Creek Formation, or the wider Lance Formation, you are almost certainly going to be in an area where the bones are of different densities and sizes. You have to look for the areas where bones are graded, and there are also places where the skeletons are graded and the bones are less so. You also have to look for those. Those are the special ones. Most parts of the fossil record are not the result of any kind of flood or landslide or anything else like that.
God has the right to judge his creation. And he does, folks. This is his world. He can wreck it any time he wants. And they sure don't want to admit there's a coming judgment. But judgment is coming anyway, whether you like it or not. And we're going to be judged by everything we've ever said or thought or done.
Dr. Truth says, most fossils I've found have been invertebrates. Most fossils everyone has found have been invertebrates. There are a lot more of them. A lot of them have shells or carapaces or other things like that. And a lot of them live in places that fossilization is easy. So yeah. Captain Gargoyle... Bob Knob says, most fossils I've found have been in government. That's fair. I found a lot of those too. Captain Gargoyle says, have you ever heard a good creationist explanation for the lack of stratification in the fossil record? Basically, I hear some of them go with a combination of hydrologic sorting and ecological zonation. The problem is that neither of them works on its own, and they still don't work together because it still doesn't actually follow, because you still get things like large animals that are washed out to sea, and we get marine deposits in places that are above and below, so sandwiched between terrestrial deposits, which means that an ocean would have had to been transported on top of a terrestrial environment during the flood, developed an ecosystem, then had to go extinct. Then during the flood, a new terrestrial ecosystem would have had to been transported on top of it without any of it, or at least most of it, becoming turbidite deposits, and then be deposited under depositional environments that are perfectly ordinary for just everyday sort of deposition, like lacustrine and riverine, or even aeolian in some cases. Aeolian being like subaerial, like wind-borne. So yeah, there is literally no good explanation for a flood causing the fossil record as a whole, or even in any significant part. A flood did not form any significant part of the fossil record as a whole. Some floods did form parts, small parts, of the fossil record, though.
Except the blood of Jesus Christ, God's Son, has cleansed me from all sin, so I'm excited about that for Judgment Day. I won't have to answer for everything because it's all taken care of. Jesus is coming, and boy, is he
a good
man.
thing too, Kent. You'd have a lot to answer for.
Yeah, that. My goodness.
Saw that on a bumper sticker one time. Boy, that's true. Sometimes we get excited about, boy, the Lord's coming back. Have you thought about that? I mean, what if he came back now? Would you be happy? A lot of folks would say, hey, Lord, they're glad you're here. Could you come back tomorrow? I'm not quite ready yet, you know. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. You skip down to verse 5, and it says, the evening and the morning were the first day. Notice the word the, T-H-E. In English, that is called the definite article. You know what the three articles are? A, an, and the, right.
You can actually find some people arguing that the word some occasionally functions as an indefinite plural article, and I tend to like those arguments, but the counter arguments are also pretty convincing, so I won't hold it against Kent, and I will say go ahead and take a drink because he's broadly correct from many linguistic descriptions of English.
That's how I was taught.
Is it?
I was taught three articles.
Okay.
A, an.
When some functions as an article, you get it like things like, would you like some apples? Or would you like some coffee? So some becomes like the partite and or plural article. It functions like one.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying, like.
Yeah, no. Look,
I think it's a reasonable thing for Kent to say because that's how most people talk or whatever.
Traditional descriptions of traditional descriptions of current modern English typically do not include some as a plural indefinite and as a partite indefinite. But I tend to favor the ones that do because of the way I speak English, so I get both sides. But yeah, I still agree with Kent here that this is a perfectly reasonable description of English.
The or the first day. This is called the definite article.
Mm-hmm.
If I said, go get me a spoon, well, that's not definite. It could be any spoon, right? If I said, go get me the spoon, well, now you know I'm talking about a particular one, right?
Yep.
And it says it was the first day.
Okay.
Now, in the Hebrew, I don't speak any Hebrew, but the Hebrew scholars tell me.
So a guy who doesn't speak any Hebrew, which means he knows less Hebrew than I do, and I don't speak a whole lot of Hebrew, he's going to lecture us on the use of the definite article in Hebrew. So here we go. Let's strap in, guys.
That this phrase here says day 1. It gives it a specific number. It was day number 1.
Okay, so it doesn't
And
use
the
a
next one
definite
is
article.
day number 2. I mean, it could not be more definite. It's the most definite way to possibly say it in Hebrew.
But it doesn't actually use the definite article? Got it. Now, one interesting thing is that the definite article in Hebrew is actually directly related to the definite article in Arabic. And they probably at first, when those two languages were closer together, had the same form. In Hebrew, the definite article is ha, and then you double the first consonant. And in Arabic, it's al, but the initial H is an easy thing that you lose in a lot of in languages all the time. And before some letters, the L becomes a doubled version of the original consonant. So, for instance, in the Arabic word shams, which is, I think it's moon. Anyway, when you say the moon, it's ashams instead of al-shams. And in Hebrew, if the word shams exists in Hebrew, I don't know if it does, it would be hashams. There you go, a little bit of Semitic linguistics.
Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, etc. on through. And I use King James.
Dr. Truth points out a good point. Not all languages have articles. Actually, most don't. Most languages don't bother.
Version for lots of reasons. We get into that later.
But the ones who are likely to learn will.
avpublications.com. I've talked to Gail Ripplinger many times. She got some kind of disease.
Okay, Gail Ripplinger is a crazy woman who thinks that God came down in her dreams to tell her that all versions of the Bible, except for the King James Version, are satanic plots by New Age atheists to pervert the Word of God. She knows nothing about Greek or Hebrew, even less than I do. Probably less than Kent does, somehow. Yeah, like, honestly. Even most Christians are like, Gail Ripplinger is a crazy person, and there is no reason to listen to anything she has to say. So, yeah. Gail Ripplinger is just complete, like, she's crazy in a different way. She literally thinks that God is telling her secrets about versions of the Bible in her dreams. And in her book, she names versions of the Bible wrong. And when asked why she couldn't even get the names of these translations right, she said, well, what I call them in my book is what God calls those translations in heaven. That was her excuse.
Okay.
Yeah. When asked about the NASB, which it's right here, right there, right? Versions compared. It's actually the New American Standard Version. Oh, sorry, no, it is. She mixed up B and V. I don't remember which one is which. But yeah, when asked about that, she was like, oh, well, that's what God calls it in heaven. It's like, no, that's not a good enough excuse. God getting the name of the Bible wrong isn't going to fly. For me, at least. I do not consider that acceptable.
That put her flat on her back for 6 years, I believe, in bed. She was an English professor, PhD in English. She taught at the university or college out there, someplace in Virginia, I believe. And so while she's laying flat on her back in bed for 6 or 7 years, she read every other version of the Bible that she could get her hands on and kept copious notes on all this and is just considered one of the world's experts on this topic.
No, she is not considered one of the world's experts.
Well, she is by Kent.
Look, this is like Velikovsky level, quote unquote, expert. This is just making crap up on the spot, pretending that God told you, and then just going with it. Like,
Several folks have written nasty books, calling her all sorts of things, and I've read some of the other stuff written against her. When I'd read that stuff, first thing I do, I'd call her up. Hey, Gail, they're saying this about you. What's your answer? Give her a chance to defend herself.
Look, Gail, I've heard Gail Riplinger try to defend herself in front of critics on TV. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm glad that Kent likes her answer, but Kent also doesn't know what he's talking about. So we have the blind leading the blind here.
Every time she's had an awesome answer. I find that with a lot of people that get
ironic because Kent wrote a poem about two blind people.
That was
in his dissertation.
Oh my goodness!
Which I didn't know about until I was skimming through, based on someone said something about his dissertation earlier, and I was like, "Why is there a poem in this? And how come I haven't read his dissertation yet?"
Actually, you know what?
A little bit.
Let me know in the comments, right? If you make it this far into the video, or if you're just watching live, which thank you very much, and you want there to be a reading of Kent Hovind's dissertation, let me know, and let me know what format you would like it in. Like, do you want it to just be like a video that I post? Do you want it to be like a live thing where we can have commentary? Do you want me to have guests on for it? Because it's not hard to get. It's on WikiLeaks. So let me know in the comments. You can also let me know in the chat.
I still have it open.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, let us know if that's something that you would like, because I'm willing to have Kent Hovind's dissertation up on my channel. It might be in multiple parts because, it's not as long as a dissertation should be, as far as I know, but it's not short either.
It's 102 pages or whatever.
Actually, that's a pretty decent size, I think, for a PhD. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Call them up and let them defend themselves. I tell people, if you have something to say to me, call me and ask me. Tell me.
Read it.
If you disagree with me on something, tell me. I'll fix it or show you where you're wrong.
Read Kent's dissertation in Klingon.
But if you're wrong,
I'll tell you what, Tesla Ranger, you're gonna have to pay me to translate that thing into Klingon. I'm not doing that for free. That is not a fun. Yeah, that would take a long time. So if you want to pay me, you probably have to pay me like per word of the dissertation. Honestly, then yeah, I'll do that. Otherwise, sorry, that's way too much work for no one's benefit.
Paul, are you willing to fix it? So there's a lot of things that have been changed from other versions of the Bible. Now, some people go real overboard on this topic, I think. I would rather have somebody read NIV than Playboy. Okay. So it depends what you want to compare this with. There's an awful lot of good Christians that read other versions of the Bible. They love...
Wait, didn't Playboy stop doing nudes? I think I heard an article about that.
Maybe, I don't know.
From what I remember, that Playboy phased out nude photos, and now it's basically just actual like interviews and like articles and stuff. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's just fake news.
I don't know.
Look, I don't read Playboy, so I don't know. I know, shocker, right?
I know, right?
Well, I believe in evolution, though, so I'm supposed to be wandering after my lust, so that should be the only thing I read. I'm doing evolution wrong, Bent. Quick, find me the page where I can subscribe to Playboy so I can make sure that I get Playboy in the mail every week or month. I think it's monthly. I don't even know how often they publish. I assume it's monthly. Most magazines are.
The Lord as much as I do. I don't think they've studied the subject carefully, and I won't get into a lot of that now about the Alexandrian manuscript and all that, but there's a good reason why you should stick with King James. I realize some of the words are a little hard to understand. There's about 20 archaic words.
Read the Bible for the articles. I'm mostly familiar with the Song of Solomon. That's about it.
Actually, you know what? There was one time when I actually went to the Playboy website to read an article because it was an interview with some celebrity. I was like, that actually sounds like an interesting interview. And I actually did go to the website to find that actual article. So I
my high school philosophy class in my YEC school had an article from Ayn Rand, an interview from Playboy on Ayn Rand. We had to read the article and
the famously anti-theist Ayn Rand.
That was a weird class.
Okay, so in case anyone doesn't know, Ayn Rand she founded Objectivism, which is a school of libertarian thought, and she was vehemently against religion. She was extremely atheist, despite herself founding a cult of personality in which she sexually abused married members of her sect. So that's fun. Yeah. But yeah, despite founding a cult, she managed to somehow be extremely and stridently atheist. So, and also apparently gave an interview to Playboy. So, weird.
Well, learn those 20 words and then you're fine. Everybody wants to bring the Bible down to their intellect.
It's literally not what translating the Bible is.
Drink like 75 times for every time Kent's been projecting.
Yeah, I'm
this.
just going to take a whole big drink for this whole ridiculousness about Bible translations. Okay.
He's so good at projection.
Okay, so the reason that translations are made of ancient texts, including but not limited to the Bible, is to bring the texts to the understanding and comprehension of modern readers so that they don't have to study the ancient languages. Because most people don't have time to become experts in ancient Greek or classical Hebrew or Aramaic or Akkadian or classical Latin or whatever, right? The attempt is not to dumb down the text. Greek isn't a smarter language than modern English, right? The people who study it and find it complicated, that's because it's different. Greek is complicated in ways that English isn't, and English is complicated in ways that Greek isn't. Greek splits up certain terms that English would lump together, but English does the same thing. Creating a new translation is an attempt to make a text understandable to modern audiences. The reason that a lot of people don't want to use a 400-year-old text is because in 400 years, English has moved on a bit. And most people, the same way that they don't have time to learn New Testament Greek, don't have time to learn early modern English, which is what the New King James is written in. Which, granted, it's not as big a difference. It won't take as much study. But still, people are busy. Now, granted, I'm a weirdo who learned Old and Middle English in school for reasons of getting a minor. And as a result, early modern English is not too big of a challenge for me. But most people aren't in that position. Most people are just like, I'm just going to interpret this as near as I can with modern English. Or, well, current modern English, because, it's late modern English, I guess? I don't know, whatever.
You think English is done being modernized? It's going to be changing for a while.
Well, that's the other thing. English isn't dumber now than it was in 1611. It's just different. Languages don't generally dumb down. They change. The complicated parts shift.
Well, how about bringing your intellect up to the Bible instead?
Because that's not what translations do.
I mean, wouldn't that be smart?
I'm taking a drink for that whole thing.
So you might want to look up avpublications.com or the video translations. It really is amazing, showing some of the changes that have been made. For instance, if you have an NIV or some of the newer Bibles, look up Acts 8:37. Not there.
Yes, because the best manuscript evidence says it wasn't original to the text. So there's this idea in Christianity that the Bible is inspired, and this is especially in forms of Protestant Christianity. The Bible was inspired primarily in what's called the original autographs, which is the original transcription of what was being written. And the reason I say it that way is because in the ancient world, when Greek and Latin were still the primary literary languages, the way that you would write a book is you would have some scribes with you, and they would be jotting down the things that you're dictating to them in shorthand. Then they would compare notes, and another scribe would, on the basis of these compared notes, write out the full text in the standard alphabet that everyone could read, as opposed to the shorthand, which was, as now, still sort of a specialized skill for taking dictation by hand. So the idea was that that original copy that was made on the basis of these transcriptions is what's actually inspired. And then you use things like textual criticism to recover as much as possible what the original reading is. And there's a whole actual science behind that whole thing. This is a real field of study with actual experts and techniques and methods and all that to try to look at manuscript evidence of ancient texts, including the Bible, but also other texts, and recover the most likely original reading. And the KJV had much fewer and lower quality, meaning essentially more recent texts to work from. And much of it wasn't actually translated from any Greek text. Some of it was just translated from the Latin, that included later interpolations from sources that we don't currently have. And there is no antecedent Greek text for some of the King James Version. Now, if you look at other things like the NIV or the NASB or, the ESV or whatever, they'll usually have marginalia or footnotes telling you about textual variants, including these extra verses that were probably not in the original.
It goes Acts 8:35, 8:36, 8:38. You see, where's verse 37? I mean, it's gone. 200 verses are just flat gone. And they're all listed on avpublications.com. You can get it there. We've got a whole shelf full of books in the library there about this topic on the King James versus other versions of the Bible. But matter of fact, I've got all my Bibles in there too, a collection of other versions of the Bible, and you're welcome to look through that. In the Revised Standard Version, which I got saved from, I was in the Methodist Church in 4th grade, perfect attendance. That was a little tough. But
congrats.
We got a Bible for perfect attendance for 4th grade. The Bible, they call it.
That's actually a pretty nice gift. Bibles aren't cheap. I mean, they're not, super expensive, but, it's a reasonably valuable thing to give a 4th grader. I wouldn't mind having a cut. Yeah. I mean, look.
Called it a Bible. It was a Revised Standard Version, one of the most liberal versions there is.
Oh, no.
They have changed thousands of things in that one. But I got to reading all my different...
Note that what Kent means when he says changed is the translation doesn't directly agree with the King James Version. That doesn't mean that actually anything has been changed. It just means that the translators don't think the translation in the King James Version is correct. The original text that they're working from, they're not changing at all.
Different versions of the Bible to see how they handled the creation story. This one says, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning, one day. Now keep in mind, the Hebrew language called for the definite day 1, day 2. This is a subtle change. One day instead of day 1 totally takes away the definiteness of the phrase.
But then it says a second day, which still would imply strongly to your sensibilities that we're talking about literal days. I mean,
this is all bad as it depends on what the definition of is.
Yeah.
This is not... If this is what you do to figure out your favorite version of the Bible, you were doing it wrong.
Now, Dr. Truth also points out not all versions have the verses parsed the same. That is true. There's pretty big consensus. For one thing, in the Old Testament, each Hebrew sentence tends to just be a verse if you're translating from Hebrew. But yeah, so one thing is that the chapters were a later addition to the Bible, long after it had already been codified as a particular set of works. And then the verses were even later. So the versification and the chapter numbers are just a handy reference for scholars, basically. And they are not always exactly the same everywhere.
And they did this on purpose, I'm convinced.
Really?
They don't like the idea of 6 literal days of creation. They want to say there's a gap between verse 1 and verse 2. Some people, this was thought up by a Scottish preacher named Chalmers in 1814.
But the question isn't what's the intent of the translators. The question is the translation reasonable? But can't assess that.
I don't know the guy, obviously, but he probably was a well-meaning fella trying to make millions of years fit into the Bible. A lot of people fall into this trap. Some scientists start teaching...
For $5 from Bob Knob, liberal Bible version, why did Kennan evangelicals pretend Jesus was not a radical socialist? I actually wouldn't entirely agree that he was a socialist in some senses. He was in other senses. I think that Jesus actually had more in common with some of the utopian socialists of the late 18th and early 19th century than he did with the so-called scientific socialists that you start getting in the mid to late 19th century.
In the this time century.
So one of the things about Jesus was that it's very hard to find a place where he recommended an enforced tax and welfare system. Instead, it seemed like he was much more in favor of things like communities banding together on a voluntary basis to collectively care for the needy among them. So I actually do think that would probably be more closely aligned with modern private charity than it would with, say, a social safety net. Which is actually one of the reasons why...
Just stop worrying about that stuff and pay attention to what God has for you.
Well, I would also say that trying to graft Jesus onto modern political definitions He did say that. He did say pay your taxes, Ken. So, but yeah, trying to graft Jesus onto a modern like political compass is a bit tricky because there are definitely things that he would disagree with regarding, say, modern sort of socialist practices. Like it's pretty hard to find much support in the teachings of Jesus for, say, state-owned businesses in terms of like things like like, oh, the state owns the oil company. But on the other hand, it's pretty hard to find things like just charge whatever the market will bear and that's the fair price. Or like, for instance, he probably wasn't okay with accepting interest on loans. He certainly wasn't okay with people using quote-unquote unfair weights in the temple for monetary exchange, which is how money changers today make money, is because they don't actually give you the real exchange rate. They favor it each time in favor of you. For instance, if you take $50 US into a money changer at like the airport and you try to change it to, say, British pounds and then back to dollars, you're not going to get your $50 back. So, yeah, there's Jesus is a complicated figure if you're trying to just graft him onto your politics. He certainly wouldn't be a Republican, but I also don't think he would be a Democrat. I don't think he would be a modern libertarian. I don't think he'd be a modern socialist. So, yeah. Anyway.
Teaching something. And so everybody runs around and says, we have to make the Bible fit with this. That's what Hugh Ross's problem is. Hugh Ross was trained up to believe the earth is billions of years old. Evolution is a fact. Now, how do we make the Bible fit with that? And he's a very nice guy, and he's working very hard to make the Bible fit with what he thinks is true.
What the evidence shows, in the case of Hugh Ross, who is an old earth creationist, Hugh Ross is if I remember correctly, he's a cosmologist. So, like, he knows that things like the Big Bang are true, that the universe cannot be 10,000 years old. And so what he is attempting to do is to try and make a version of Christianity that doesn't take the things that he knows aren't true, that he knows are true because of the actual physical evidence, and toss them out. Now, where Hugh Ross, in my opinion, goes a little weird is when he gets into biology, which he doesn't know much about, in which case he goes with an anti-evolutionist old Earth stance, which he's just as wrong about as Kent is about the age of the universe. Well, the thing is, Creo Debunk says Jesus is sort of apolitical, except that you can definitely find political policies that Jesus would not be okay with. So, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I don't think any current political ideology closely aligns to Jesus, but then again, there are definitely aspects to Jesus that are political. Like, he was not okay with the subjugation of the Jewish people under the Roman Empire, and I don't know. He would probably be definitely not okay with things like the government setting up spikes under bridges to keep the homeless out. Yeah, I don't think Jesus would be okay with that one.
And there's the problem. I think if you approach this properly, you'll say, okay, the Bible is the Word of God. Now, how do we make these things we see from science fit with this?
Okay, well, I'm going to take a drink. That's what you call academic fraud, where you start off with your conclusion and then you twist whatever facts you can to meet that pre-drawn conclusion. That is the opposite of how science works. Science, ideally, is supposed to be as unbiased a look at the evidence as possible, and then seeing what hypotheses can be reasonably drawn from it, making predictions about what we will and won't see, and then testing those to see if you're wrong, and then coming back to the drawing board if you are, and adjusting and making a better hypothesis. What Kent is describing is pseudoscience. It is starting with your conclusion, whether it's falsifiable or not, and then fitting all available data into it, no matter how ill-fitting that data actually is. This is the absolute height of intellectual dishonesty. You can't actually get worse than that. And like I've said before, including recently on Kent with Bent, the Bible is not prior to physical reality. In order to even perceive the Bible, you have to encounter it as a part of physical reality. Physical reality trumps your interpretation of the Bible, and if you can't come up with an interpretation of the Bible that is in harmony with physical reality, then it trumps the Bible. That's just how it is. There is no logical way to make the Bible prior to physical reality that I've ever seen. I encourage any Christians or anyone else for that matter, who thinks that you can find a way to make your scripture prior to physical reality as a reasonable argument, send it at me. Because, I mean, look, if you can convince me, I'll convert to that religion. I would much rather believe in a religion that can actually successfully make that argument than not, because, I mean, that's a pretty good piece of evidence that it's true in my book. But with that, we are going to be closing up. Bent, do you have anything that you want to plug coming up?
Just Copper Magma, yeah. .com.
Now, doesn't Copper Magma have a show coming up?
Oh, there's a show, yeah, but it's like a house party kind of deal.
Okay, so it's not just generally open?
Friday. No.
Okay.
No tickets available. Yeah, it's like 2 guests per person.
Okay.
In the band, right? And so it's gonna be a fun show. Some Friday.
Ben Downey 1998 for $5 says it's almost like our culture has changed in the past 100 years, let alone the past 2,000 years when Jesus lived. Yeah, I mean ultimately that is what it comes down to. Jesus' politics don't map well onto modern political schema. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I hesitate to call him a socialist. But on the other hand, he's certainly not a right-wing GOP guy. He would be very disappointed in today's GOP, I think.
Probably.
For one thing, they're way too bloodthirsty. But anyway, as far as this, so this Thursday, it's going to be a re-upload of my Flat Earth debate. Sorry, I know it's probably not the most interesting thing, but right now I am finishing up a render, like as we speak, for the next Speculative Evolution video. So that should be up a week after on Thursday. Next Tuesday is going to be a pre-recorded Kent with Bent because I have a friend visiting and I don't want to have to do 2 of these while my friend is here and take away all that time, which does, however, mean that I will only be sort of in the chat for that. So if you do send any super chats or anything during the pre-recorded Kent with Bent, I will try to collect them and read them on the next live stream that I do. I don't currently have anything planned for this Saturday. There you go. So I hope everyone has a wonderful evening or morning or whatever it is where you are. And I will hopefully see you Thursday and then next Tuesday. So, bye everybody. I want to take a little time to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 or more. Bob Knob, Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Patrick Dennis, and Res Instance. YouTube is a very volatile platform, what with fraudulent copyright claims, demonetization, and the ever-decreasing share of ad revenue on the platform. It is very hard to rely on YouTube. My members and patrons help keep this channel going, and without them, the channel wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join my Patreon, the link is in the description, and if you'd like to become a channel member, that link is below the video. It's the join button here on YouTube. Either way, you'll get access to early videos, an exclusive Discord server, and if you pledge enough, 3D assets you can use in your own projects.